Melissa stormed into the kitchen like a hurricane that had finally found a door to tear through. One hand kept Caleb close beside her, while the other pointed straight at Claire. Daniel was already standing in the hallway, his phone recording before anyone had even spoken the first word. Claire Morgan was still holding a kitchen towel. On the table, a spilled glass of apple juice had formed a pale golden trail across the wood. Caleb was crying, but not in panic. His head was lowered, his lips trembling as though he were trying to remember a sentence someone had told him to say. Melissa pushed her son forward. "Go on, Caleb. Tell Uncle Daniel what Aunt Claire did to you." The boy swallowed hard. "Aunt Claire hurt my arm." The kitchen fell silent. Claire looked at Caleb, then Melissa, and finally at the man who had slept beside her for 14 years. She waited for Daniel to ask what had happened. He didn't. He only stared at her with eyes so cold they seemed to belong to a stranger. "I was afraid this was going to happen." A chill ran down Claire's spine. That was not the reaction of a man who had just heard terrible news. It was the reaction of someone who had been waiting for it to begin. Less than half an hour earlier, the house had been peaceful beneath a late autumn Sunday afternoon in suburban Columbus. Mia was upstairs doing homework. Melissa and Caleb had come over for dinner, just as they often did. Claire had grown used to the fact that cracks in a marriage rarely made a sound. They simply spread. Throughout dinner, Daniel kept checking his phone. Every time the screen lit up, he turned it face down on the table. Melissa talked more than usual, but her eyes repeatedly flicked toward her younger brother. Twice, she found excuses to take Caleb out of the living room. Claire noticed everything. She just hadn't connected any of it yet. For months, Daniel had been coming home late, always blaming work. Then he began excluding Claire from financial meetings at the company they had built together. He told her she should focus on design and clients. He would handle the numbers. It sounded like concern. But every time he said it, Claire felt as though another door had quietly closed in front of her. That afternoon, Daniel had also asked her a strange question. "Are you going out tomorrow morning?" Claire told him she had a client meeting late in the morning. Daniel had simply nodded. Now, as she looked at the phone recording in his hand, that question returned like a shard of glass. Melissa pulled up Caleb's sleeve. There was a reddened patch on his arm. "Look at that," she said. She grabbed him hard enough to leave a mark. Claire stepped forward instinctively. Caleb immediately moved back. But before he did, he looked at his mother. Just one quick glance. Claire saw it. Melissa realized Claire had seen it too. Claire lowered her hand. "Caleb, I never touched you. You know that." The boy bit his lip. Melissa cut in immediately. "Don't pressure him." Claire turned toward Daniel. "You actually believe this?" Daniel said nothing. His silence hurt more than an accusation. Not long after, Elaine arrived after Daniel called her. She looked at Caleb, then at the red mark on his arm, then at Claire. No one asked where Claire had been when it supposedly happened. No one asked why Daniel had already been recording. Elaine simply said Claire should leave the house for a few days so everyone could calm down. Claire laughed. A short, dry sound with no humor in it. "Leave where?" "This house, just temporarily." Daniel stepped in. "I can book you a hotel." Claire looked at each of them. Melissa had one arm around Caleb's shoulders. Elaine was trying to disguise surrender as reconciliation. Daniel was still holding his phone. And then Claire understood the most frightening part. No one in that room was trying to find the truth. They were trying to make her leave. Claire placed the kitchen towel on the table. "No." Daniel frowned. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. This is my house." Claire didn't raise her voice, but the room went still. Daniel stepped closer. "This isn't the time to start talking about ownership." Claire lifted her head. He had chosen the wrong word. Daniel had spent years thinking Claire only handled the beautiful side of their company. Design, clients, presentation. Because he managed the bank accounts and dealt with the financial side, he had convinced himself that the real power belonged to him. But Claire's inheritance had provided the original capital that launched the business. She had signed the lease on their first office. And she still owned a legal share in the company that Daniel could not simply erase from the paperwork. Most of the down payment on the house had also come from Claire's separate assets. She was not a guest in Daniel's life. She was one of the people who had built it. But Claire said none of that. Not yet. Daniel mistook her silence for weakness. He didn't understand that Claire often went quiet when she stopped looking at a problem emotionally and started studying it like a blueprint. She stopped looking at the accusation. She started looking at the structure. Why had Melissa chosen today? Why had Daniel asked about her schedule tomorrow morning? Why had his phone already been recording before Melissa entered the kitchen? And why was their first priority not finding out what had happened to Caleb, but getting Claire out of the house? Daniel said he was taking Mia to stay with Elaine for a few days. Claire did not argue in front of their daughter. She hugged Mia, told her that Mom was all right, and stood at the window as Daniel's car pulled out of the driveway beneath the darkening evening sky. The house fell silent. There were still dirty plates on the table. One chair remained pulled out at an angle. An entire family had just walked through the front door, leaving behind a story they expected Claire to believe. She closed her eyes. The pain was still there. But underneath it, something else was beginning to wake. Suspicion. I was afraid this was going to happen. Claire repeated Daniel's words in her mind. No, he wasn't afraid. He had been prepared. If Claire was right, Melissa's accusation was not the moment her family fell apart. It was the first move in a plan. What Daniel didn't know was that the woman he was trying to push out of her own home was nowhere near as powerless as he believed. And for the first time in months, Claire stopped asking herself what she had done wrong. She started asking what Daniel was hiding. That question followed Claire through the entire night, slipping into every silent room of the house. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's phone in his hand, heard his words again, and remembered the way Caleb had looked at his mother before stepping away from her. By morning, Claire understood something frightening. If what happened the night before had truly been a misunderstanding, Daniel would have called her by now. But the phone remained silent. The first day passed like a punishment without a verdict. Claire called Mia twice. Both times Daniel answered instead of their daughter. He said Mia needed space, that she was confused, that it would be better to let the professionals handle things. What professionals? Daniel paused. Then he told her Melissa had reported the incident. That was when Claire understood the accusation had left her kitchen. It was no longer a family dispute. It had become a case. The following day, Daniel sent only one message. Mia was safe at Elaine's house. Claire should not come over because it might make things more tense. Claire read the message several times. He did not say he believed her. He did not say he was trying to find out the truth. He simply built another door between them. On the third morning, the doorbell rang. The woman standing on Claire's porch wore a dark gray coat and carried a thin folder. She introduced herself as Rachel Kim, a child protection investigator assigned to review the report. Claire felt her stomach tighten. Rachel did not accuse her. She did not comfort her either. She simply explained that a report had been filed and that her job was to determine what had actually happened. That neutrality frightened Claire more than anger would have. Here, love meant nothing. Loyalty meant nothing. Only the truth would stand. Claire invited Rachel into the living room. The house looked exactly as it had a few days earlier, yet everything inside it seemed to carry a different meaning now. The chair where Caleb had sat. The doorway Daniel had walked through when he took Mia away. Rachel opened the folder. She asked whether Claire had ever lost her temper around children. No. She asked about her relationship with Melissa. Not close, but nothing like this has ever happened before. Then Rachel asked whether there were problems in Claire's marriage. Claire hesitated. She wanted to say no. Part of her still wanted to protect the image of a marriage that had lasted 14 years. But protecting something already cracked did not make it whole again. Claire admitted that Daniel had become distant. He had taken more control over the company's finances, started coming home late, and stopped sharing things with her the way he once had. Rachel wrote it down. Is your husband supporting you? Claire looked out the window. No. One word. But saying it felt like signing her name beneath a truth she had avoided for months. Rachel asked why Daniel had taken Mia away from the house. Claire explained that he said he wanted to protect their daughter from the tension. But another thought had begun forming in Claire's mind. If Daniel was already preparing for divorce, an accusation involving a child could change the way strangers viewed Claire before they ever heard the full story. Rachel closed the folder. Claire, I haven't reached any conclusions. I need to hear from everyone involved and verify whatever can be verified. Claire nodded. Then she described Sunday afternoon. Melissa entering the kitchen. Caleb crying. Daniel already recording. Elaine arriving almost immediately. Everyone insisting Claire should leave. But the more she explained, the more powerless she felt. Melissa had one simple story. Claire had hurt Caleb. Claire had dozens of details. Questions. Suspicions. Contradictions. Her truth was complicated. Their lie was neat. Rachel stood to leave. Claire walked her toward the hallway while fragments of memory flashed through her mind. Daniel holding the phone. Melissa looking toward the back door. Caleb glancing at his mother. Then Claire stopped. The back door. Daniel had installed a doorbell camera and an exterior security camera years earlier. He knew exactly what they could see. Melissa had visited the house enough times to know too. If someone had planned to stage something, they would have known which areas to avoid. For one brief second, hope appeared, then almost disappeared. But Claire's eyes fell toward a low shelf near the hallway. Beside it sat the water bowl for the dog they had recently adopted. And suddenly she remembered. 3 weeks earlier, because the dog kept scratching at the door whenever it was left alone, Claire had moved a pet camera from her office into the hallway. The small device sat partly hidden behind a plant. It automatically uploaded motion clips to her cloud account. Daniel had never paid attention to it. Once, he had even teased Claire for buying too many things for the dog. Claire spun around. Rachel stopped. "What is it?" Claire did not answer immediately. Her heart was pounding. But for the first time in 3 days, it was not beating entirely from fear. If the camera was still working, it was not pointed toward the area Daniel believed was under surveillance. It was pointed directly into the hallway. Claire hurried toward the shelf. Her hands trembled as she opened the app, but her mind had suddenly become clear. For years, Daniel had taught her to believe that power belonged to the person who controlled the money, the contracts, and the information. He had forgotten that Claire had helped build this house, too. She knew the accounts, the devices, the small details he considered too unimportant to notice. And sometimes real power did not belong to the person who spoke the loudest. Sometimes it belonged to the person who knew where the truth had been stored. A list of video clips appeared. Sunday. Afternoon. Several recordings. Rachel looked at the screen, then at Claire. Claire took a slow breath. Maybe we don't have to decide who to believe. Her finger stopped over the clip recorded at almost exactly the moment Caleb had started crying. Maybe the house recorded the truth for us. Claire tapped the screen. For a moment, it went dark. Then the footage appeared. Caleb was standing alone in the hallway, and Claire was nowhere in sight. That single truth changed the entire room. Rachel stepped closer to the screen. Claire remained perfectly still, both hands resting on the edge of the table, as if one sudden movement might make the footage in front of her disappear. On the screen, Caleb stood alone in the hallway. He was holding a glass of apple juice, glanced toward the living room, then accidentally spilled it onto the floor. He startled. Claire was nowhere in sight. There was no shouting, no confrontation. Nothing remotely resembling the story Melissa had told. A few seconds later, Melissa appeared. Claire held her breath. Melissa moved quickly toward Caleb, looked down at the spill, then glanced toward the back door. The look lasted only a second, but Rachel noticed immediately. "She's checking something," Rachel said. Claire knew exactly what Melissa was looking at. The outdoor security camera. The one Daniel had installed years ago. Melissa had been inside this house dozens of times. She knew where it was. On the footage, Melissa guided Caleb farther into the hallway. She did not move like a mother who had just discovered her child was in danger. There was no panic, no frantic search for help. She was frighteningly calm. Melissa crouched beside her son and said something to him. The audio from the small pet camera was faint and slightly distorted. Rachel turned up the volume. Caleb shook his head. "I don't want to." Claire felt her throat tighten. Melissa said something else, but the words were unclear. Then she held Caleb's arm for several seconds. There was no graphic violence on the screen, but the boy's reaction was enough for Claire to understand how the reddened area Melissa later used against her had appeared. Claire turned her face away. She had imagined that finding evidence would bring relief. But watching Caleb on the screen, she felt nothing close to victory. All she saw was a child being pulled into a conflict created by adults. Rachel remained silent for several seconds. Her professional composure was still there, but something in her eyes had changed. The video continued. Melissa leaned closer to Caleb. This time, the audio came through more clearly. "You just have to tell them what I told you to say." Caleb stared at the floor. "But Aunt Claire didn't do it." Claire closed her eyes. For 4 days, she had questioned herself. Had she missed something? Had some harmless gesture been misunderstood? Had Caleb remembered events incorrectly? Now there was no room left for that kind of doubt. Melissa knew. Caleb knew. And Claire had not even been there. Rachel raised one hand. "Don't edit anything." Claire looked at her. "I won't. Keep the original file, the cloud account, and the recording timestamps exactly as they are. I want our department to review this directly." Claire nodded. Rachel explained carefully that the footage could significantly change the direction of the investigation, but everything still had to be properly verified. She made no promises. She declared no one guilty. Claire understood. For the first time in days, she didn't need a promise. She had something better. A truth that could be verified. Rachel asked to watch the footage again from the beginning. This time Claire focused on the smaller details. Melissa entering, looking toward the back door, moving Caleb into the hallway. Every motion suggested she was trying to avoid a particular area. A chill ran down Claire's spine. She knew what the outdoor camera could see. Rachel turned toward her. "What do you mean?" Daniel showed the whole family the security system when he installed it. Melissa knew where the main cameras were. Rachel looked back at the screen. But she didn't know about this one. No. Claire had moved the pet camera into the hallway only a few weeks earlier. Daniel had never even asked where it was. The irony was almost cruel. Someone had tried to control every detail, yet overlooked the one thing he considered unimportant. A camera meant for the dog. Claire almost laughed. But she couldn't. Rachel moved the footage forward. After speaking to Caleb, Melissa stood. The boy still looked uncertain. Melissa lowered her voice. "Just this once, then everything will be okay." Caleb said nothing. A few minutes later, they disappeared from the frame. Claire looked at the timestamp. Almost immediately afterward came the moment Melissa had entered the kitchen and accused her. Everything had happened too quickly. This had not been an emotional reaction. It had not been a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. There had been preparation. Claire remembered Daniel's phone in his hand. A question began growing inside her. If Melissa knew how to avoid the main cameras, who had told her where the blind spots were? The answer was so obvious that Claire did not want to touch it. Daniel. Still, part of her resisted. He was her husband. Mia's father. The man who had stayed awake beside Claire through the night when her mother died. The man who had once stood with her inside their first empty office and promised that no matter how large the company became, they would always be a team. People changed. But Claire was not ready to believe that 14 years could turn into a trap. Rachel continued scanning the list of recordings. There's another clip from almost 20 minutes later. She paused. It could just be normal movement. Claire looked at the small thumbnail. Part of someone's shoulder was visible at the edge of the frame. A dark blue shirt. Claire recognized it instantly. Daniel had been wearing that shirt on Sunday. Her heart began pounding. "Open it." Rachel looked at her for a second, then tapped the video. The hallway appeared. Melissa entered first. She was no longer crying. The panicked expression Claire had seen in the kitchen was gone. Now Melissa looked tense. She glanced towards the living room and spoke to someone standing just outside the frame. "I don't like this," a man answered. The audio was too faint. Claire leaned towards the screen. Then the man stepped half a pace forward. "Daniel." Everything inside Claire seemed to turn cold. Rachel immediately paused the video. "I need this recording handled through the proper process before we rely on the audio." Claire kept staring at her husband's face on the screen. She had wanted to be wrong. Wanted Daniel to have simply walked into the hallway by coincidence. Wanted some ordinary explanation to be waiting at the end of the clip. But somewhere deep inside, Claire already understood one thing. Daniel had not appeared after the accusation. He had been there before it began. Rachel lowered the laptop halfway. "Don't confront anyone about this yet." Claire nodded, not because she was afraid of Daniel, but because for the first time she understood that silence could be a form of power. For days, everyone had demanded that she explain herself, defend herself, prove that she was not the person they claimed she was. Now Claire no longer needed to do that. The evidence was beginning to speak for itself. Rachel left with the information needed to continue verifying the footage. Claire stood alone at the front door watching Rachel's car disappear down the street. Then she turned back toward the house. The pain was still there, but the panic was gone. Melissa had lied. That much was now clear. The larger question was why. And if Daniel had known about it in advance, Claire was no longer dealing with a false accusation. She was standing in the middle of a plan she had not yet seen in full. Behind her, the laptop screen was still frozen on Daniel's face. A husband. A father. A man Claire had once believed she understood better than anyone else. But as she looked at him on that screen, she realized the most painful truth of all. Maybe the biggest secret in this house had never been the camera. Maybe it was the person Daniel had become when Claire wasn't looking. The next morning, Claire woke before the alarm. The house was dark and cold. The other side of the bed was still perfectly smooth, as if Daniel had never belonged there at all. Her phone lit up. Daniel. He didn't call. He texted. Melissa says you're trying to twist that video into something that makes her look bad. Don't make this worse. Claire read every word slowly. Melissa knew about the video. Rachel had only left the house the previous afternoon. Claire had told no one. One question appeared immediately. Who had told Melissa? Another message from Daniel arrived. We need to talk. Claire didn't answer right away. In the past, she would have called him back. She would have explained. Tried to make him understand. Tried to save whatever remained of their marriage with one more conversation. But the Claire who woke up that morning was different. She typed only one question. Do you actually believe I hurt Caleb? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, Daniel replied. What matters right now is Mia. Claire stared at the screen as the pain in her chest turned colder. He was avoiding the question again. No yes. No. Only Mia. Their daughter's name had become a shield Daniel raised every time Claire moved too close to the truth. Claire set the phone down. Across the city, Daniel stared at their conversation. He had always believed he understood his wife. Claire was the one who wanted conflict resolved. The one who always came back to the table first. Her silence unsettled him more than any accusation could have. Near noon, Rachel called. Her voice was calm but more clipped than usual. The technical team had reviewed the original recording. There were no signs that the timestamps or underlying data had been altered. They had also managed to clarify part of the audio from the clip where Daniel appeared. Claire stood beside the window. Her hands went cold. Rachel warned her that some words were still not clear enough to determine the full meaning of the conversation. Then she played the audio. Melissa's voice came first. I don't like this. A burst of static. Then Daniel's voice. Claire recognized it instantly. I just need her out of the house before the bank meeting Monday morning. Claire stopped breathing. Rachel continued. Melissa asked. And after that? Daniel answered. Just keep the story consistent. That was all. No perfect confession. No single sentence explaining the entire plan. But Claire did not need more to feel the ground beneath her shift. Monday morning. The bank meeting. She remembered. 2 weeks earlier, Daniel had mentioned that the company might restructure one of its loans. When Claire asked for details, he told her there was nothing she needed to worry about yet. Then, on Sunday afternoon, before Melissa accused her, Daniel had asked about her schedule the next morning. Are you going out tomorrow morning? Now Claire understood. That question had never been meaningless. Rachel said her name. Claire? I'm still here. Rachel told her not to confront anyone about the audio yet. The verification process was still ongoing. The most important thing was to preserve the documents and allow the investigation to move forward properly. Claire agreed. After the call ended, she stood still for a long time. She had assumed that if Daniel was involved, the motive had to be the marriage. Maybe he wanted her gone. Maybe he was simply tired of their life together. But why did it have to happen before a bank meeting? Claire walked into the home office. A large wooden desk stood beside the window. Years earlier, this was where she and Daniel had planned their first company with sketches, invoices, and cups of cold coffee. Back then, there had been no money to hide. Now they had revenue, assets, employees, and accounts Claire was seeing less and less of. She opened the computer. Claire made no attempt to access anything outside her legal authority. She simply logged into the shared business account where she was still officially listed as a co-owner. Daniel had probably forgotten that. Or maybe he assumed Claire had grown too accustomed to not asking questions. The transactions appeared. At first, everything looked ordinary. Materials, payroll, vendor payments. Then Claire noticed a name appearing again and again. Northline Property Services. She had never heard of it. One payment. Then another. Then several more spread across the previous few months. None was large enough on its own to draw immediate attention. Together, they were no longer small. Claire opened the transaction records. The service descriptions were vague. Operations consulting, project management, development support. She checked the official vendor list. Northline wasn't there. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken. She continued reviewing only the records she was authorized to access. An older document led her to the name of Northline's listed representative, Tessa Reed. Claire froze. Tessa was Daniel's operations manager. The woman who had increasingly appeared in meetings Claire was no longer invited to. The woman Daniel had repeatedly described as one of his most trusted employees. Claire did not jump to conclusions. A name alone proved nothing. But she had learned something over the previous few days. Never dismiss a small detail just because someone else wants you to believe it doesn't matter. She opened the shared company inbox. Hundreds of emails appeared. Claire searched for Northline. Only a handful of results came up. Most involved meeting schedules and financial documents. Then another email appeared because the system had automatically forwarded it to the company address. A reservation confirmation. 2 guests. Anniversary package. Claire looked at the date. It was the same weekend Daniel had told her he needed to travel to Cincinnati to deal with a troubled project. The room seemed to move farther away. She opened the message. Daniel's name appeared as the primary guest. The second name was partially hidden. Only one initial was visible. D. Claire did not need long to guess. But she also refused to let emotion become evidence. She saved copies of the information she was legally entitled to keep, documented what she had found, then closed the computer. 2 stories were now running side by side in Claire's mind. An accusation designed to push her out of the house. A bank meeting Daniel did not want her attending. Money being transferred to a company connected to Tessa. And a trip Daniel had lied about. Claire's phone rang. Daniel. This time she answered. His voice was soft. Claire, we can't keep doing this. She looked out at the silent yard. What exactly do you want to talk about? He sighed. Us, the family, the future, maybe we need some time apart. Only a few days earlier, those words might have shattered Claire. Now she heard only one question. Why did you need me out of the house before Monday morning? The other end of the line went completely silent. Only for a second. But it was enough. Daniel forced his voice back into something normal. I don't know what you're talking about. Claire didn't argue. She simply said, Okay. Then she ended the call. Daniel stared at his phone, realizing for the first time that the plan he had believed was still under his control was beginning to slip away from him. Claire stood in the room where they had once built their future together. She had thought she was investigating one lie. Now she understood she was opening a much larger door. Behind it could be money. A divorce that had been planned before she even knew there was a plan. And possibly another woman. Claire looked again at the name on the screen. Tessa Reed. Melissa's accusation no longer felt like the center of the story. It was beginning to look like a tool. And if Claire wanted to understand what Daniel had truly intended to take from her, she would have to uncover what he had been hiding long before the entire family walked into that kitchen on Sunday afternoon. Claire sat in front of the screen for a long time after the call with Daniel ended. The name Tessa Reed was still there in the Northline Property Services records, cold and motionless, like a line of text with no idea what it had just broken open. Claire didn't cry. Her mind felt strangely clear. If Daniel needed her out of the house before the bank meeting, and if money was being transferred to a company connected to Tessa, then Claire could no longer look at each event as something separate. She needed to see the whole picture. She started with the documents she was legally entitled to access as a co-owner of the company. Nothing hidden, nothing stolen. Only records that had always carried her name, even though she had spent years allowing Daniel to manage them. The payments to Northline appeared again and again under vague descriptions. Operations support, project consulting, development services. Then Claire found a folder containing plans for a corporate restructuring. Her name was still there, but her role had been reduced. Daniel was listed as the primary person controlling operations. Claire read every line, feeling as though someone had been quietly erasing her from the company she had helped build. Then another email appeared. Daniel had met with a family law attorney weeks earlier. Not after Melissa's accusation. Before it. Claire leaned back in her chair. Their marriage had not ended on Sunday afternoon. At least not for Daniel. He had already left it. He simply had not bothered to tell her. Claire reopened the reservation confirmation she had found the day before. The attached invoice now displayed the second guest's full name. Tessa Reed. There was no room left for coincidence. 14 years of marriage suddenly collapsed into a series of small images. Daniel holding Claire's hand on the day they opened their first office. Daniel carrying Mia when she was still a baby. Daniel telling Claire that no one understood him the way she did. And then Daniel spending a weekend with another woman while telling his wife he was away handling a work emergency. Betrayal did not arrive like lightning. It came like cold water. Slow. Quiet. Seeping into everything. Claire walked towards the window. Tessa was not the person she was angriest with. Tessa had never made vows to her. Daniel had. And Daniel was the one trying to rewrite the life they had built together. Claire's phone vibrated. Elaine had sent a message saying Mia missed her, but Daniel wanted their daughter to stay a few more days. Claire tightened her grip on the phone. Pain turned into resolve. Daniel was not simply preparing to end their marriage. He was trying to control how it ended. If Claire could be made to look unstable, if she left the house, and if Daniel kept Mia with him during those first critical days, he would enter the separation with an advantage Claire had not even known she needed to protect herself from. That evening, Daniel came home. "We need to talk." Claire was sitting on the sofa. She did not open the laptop. She did not show him the hotel invoice. She did not mention the attorney. She asked only one question. "What is Northline?" Daniel stopped. "A subcontractor." "A subcontractor registered under Tessa Reed?" His expression hardened. "Have you been digging through my files?" "The company's files, the company I co-own." Daniel exhaled, his voice shifting into the patient tone Claire had once mistaken for kindness. "You saw a few numbers and built a whole story around them. You've never liked dealing with the financial side." Something old clicked into place inside Claire. For years, whenever she asked too many questions, Daniel had turned the question itself into a flaw in her. She was too emotional. She didn't understand money. She made things unnecessarily complicated. Claire had usually gone quiet. Not tonight. "Tessa helps me manage operations," Daniel said. "Northline is just a business structure. There's nothing secret about it." "Then why was I never told?" Daniel did not answer. Instead, he stepped closer. "Claire, you're already under investigation. Mia is staying with my mother. This is not the time to turn a business issue into another war." Claire heard exactly what he was doing. The accusation. Mia. The money. He placed them side by side, pushing her toward a defensive position. But Claire refused to step into it. "From now on, anything involving Mia, the company, our assets, or our finances will be discussed in writing." Daniel stared at her. "Are you threatening me?" "No." Claire stood. "I'm setting boundaries." The answer silenced him. He had prepared for tears. For anger. For a wife demanding to know whether he still loved her. He had not prepared for calm. And that was the moment the first crack appeared in his confidence. Daniel changed tactics. He said their marriage had been difficult for a long time, that neither of them had been happy, that maybe some time apart would be healthier. Claire looked at the man standing in front of her. "Have you already met with an attorney?" Daniel went still. "Only to understand my options." How long ago?" "That's not relevant." Claire felt a sharp pain in her chest. "No, it's relevant to everything." Daniel looked at her. "Are you preparing to divorce me?" Claire thought about the camera. The bank meeting. Northline. Tessa. The attorney. And suddenly she understood the most painful twist of all. It was not simply that her husband had become involved with another woman. It was that while Claire still believed they were struggling through a difficult chapter in their marriage, Daniel had already turned that marriage into a carefully managed exit strategy. She was the only person who had never been given the script. Claire looked directly at him. "No, Daniel." She paused. "I think you've been preparing for this divorce for a long time." Something shifted across his face. Only for a moment, but it was enough. Claire turned away before the tears could break through the composure she had fought so hard to hold. That night, she shut down the computer, secured the documents she needed to preserve, and sat alone in the kitchen where everything had begun. Some marriages end with a screaming argument. Claire's ended more quietly. It ended the moment she realized she no longer needed Daniel to confess before she could trust what was already right in front of her. The next morning, Claire did not call her husband. She called a lawyer. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes, but when Claire set the phone down, she felt as though she had stepped through a door with no path leading back. That afternoon, she arrived at the downtown Columbus office of Olivia Brooks. Olivia was in her 40s, spoke slowly, watched carefully, and almost never interrupted. Claire placed everything she had on the table. The pet camera footage. The information Rachel had provided. The transactions involving Northline. The emails connected to the bank meeting. The hotel reservation carrying Daniel's name and Tessa's. Then Claire told the story from beginning to end, starting with Sunday afternoon and ending with her last conversation with Daniel. Olivia did not look shocked. For some reason, that reassured Claire more than sympathy ever could. When Claire finished, Olivia closed the folder. "There are 3 separate issues here," she said. "First, the allegation involving Caleb. Second, whatever Daniel may be preparing regarding your marriage and Mia. And third, the money." Claire looked at her. Olivia continued. "We are not going to mix all 3 together emotionally. We handle each one with evidence." The words silenced Claire. For days, she had been trapped inside a story where everyone seemed to want a reaction from her. Melissa wanted anger. Daniel wanted panic. Elaine wanted surrender. Olivia wanted the opposite. Stay still. Observe. Preserve what could be proven. Olivia made her boundaries clear. Claire should not access any account she was not legally authorized to use. No guessing passwords. No taking Daniel's phone. No posting the situation online. No threatening messages to Tessa or Melissa. Claire nodded. "I don't want revenge." Olivia met her eyes. "Good, because the goal is not to hurt them. The goal is to protect you and your daughter." The sentence cut through what remained of Claire's anger. Mia. That was why she had to stay clear-headed. Olivia asked Claire to create a list of all shared assets she knew about. She also recommended bringing in an independent financial professional to review the transactions that might involve marital property. Claire asked whether Northline proved Daniel was hiding money. Olivia shook her head. "Not yet. A suspicious name is not a conclusion. A pattern of transactions does not tell the whole story by itself." Claire understood. She had spent too long living inside claims that were treated as facts without evidence. She had no intention of becoming another version of the people accusing her. Olivia turned the conversation toward Mia. Daniel could not make an unverified allegation true simply by repeating it, she explained. But Claire still needed to be careful. No arguments in front of Mia. No forcing their daughter to choose sides. Claire felt her eyes burn. "I just want her home." Olivia's voice softened. "I know." It was the first time in days that Claire allowed herself to admit how much she missed her daughter. Not the company. Not the house. Not the money. Every night when Claire passed Mia's room, she saw the small moon-shaped nightlight still sitting on the table. She had not turned it on since Mia left. Claire had once believed power meant holding on to what belonged to you. Now she was beginning to understand that sometimes power meant refusing to let fear make your decisions. When Claire left Olivia's office, she did not feel powerful. She was still afraid. But for the first time, her fear had direction. She went home and began with small things. She changed the passwords on her own personal accounts. She organized the insurance records, tax documents, and company files she was legally entitled to keep. She checked Mia's school contact information to make sure her own name was still listed as a parent. She called an old friend she had barely seen in months because Daniel was always telling her she was too busy. None of it was dramatic. But each small action felt like Claire was picking up another piece of a life she had unknowingly allowed someone else to manage. That afternoon, Daniel sent an email. He wanted to know whether Claire had hired a lawyer. She did not answer that question. Claire simply wrote that from now on, anything involving Mia, the company, or their assets should be discussed in writing. Daniel read the email twice. He had expected Claire to call, to cry, to ask about Tessa, to demand an explanation. She did none of those things. And Daniel began to understand something he had underestimated for years. Claire was not weak because she avoided conflict. She had simply spent years placing the marriage above her need to win. Now the marriage was no longer something she was trying to protect. That evening, Elaine called. She said Daniel was under enormous stress. Claire remained silent. Then Elaine asked whether Claire could try speaking to him as his wife before the situation became more serious. A week earlier, Claire might have agreed. This time, she answered quietly. Elaine, this became serious the moment everyone believed an accusation about me before asking me a single question. The other end of the line went silent. Claire did not add anything else. She did not need Elaine to apologize immediately. Some boundaries did not have to be shouted to exist. After the call, Claire sat beside the window. For years, she had believed a healthy marriage required compromise. She still believed that. But now she understood the difference between compromise and disappearing. Love might require two people to meet each other halfway. Respect could not survive if it existed on only one side. Her phone vibrated just as Claire was about to go upstairs. Rachel, Claire answered. Rachel's voice was calm. I have an update about Caleb. Claire immediately sat down. Is something wrong? Rachel explained that they had arranged for Caleb to speak with a professional experienced in working with children. The conversation would take place in an appropriate setting. Claire would not be in the room. Neither would Melissa. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken. Did he agree? Yes. Rachel paused. And Claire, it sounds like Caleb wants to tell what happened that day in his own words. Claire could not speak for a moment. She looked toward the dark kitchen. That was where Melissa had once pushed Caleb into telling a story that had never belonged to him. Maybe this time, for the first time, the boy would be able to speak without looking at his mother first to figure out what he was supposed to say next. Claire closed her eyes. She did not want Caleb to help her win. She only wanted him to be allowed to tell the truth. Because after everything Daniel and Melissa had tried to control, there was still one thing they could never completely own: the truth inside a child's memory. And if Caleb finally spoke it out loud, the plan Daniel believed he had sealed so carefully might begin to collapse from the one place he had never considered a threat. But Caleb was not the weak link. He was just a child who had been turned into a tool by the adults around him. Claire understood that more clearly on the morning of the interview. She was not allowed in the room. Neither was Melissa. Rachel explained that Caleb needed a calm space where he would not have to look at any adult and guess which answer might make them happy. Claire accepted that. She sat at home in front of a cup of coffee that had gone cold, watching the minutes crawl by on the clock. She did not hope Caleb would say something that helped her. She only hoped he would be allowed to say what he remembered. Across the city, Caleb sat in a simple room with a professional trained to speak with children. There was no threatening tone, no pressure, no leading questions. Only time. At first, Caleb said very little. He talked about Sunday lunch, the apple juice, the hallway. Then he went quiet. When he was asked what Claire had done, he lowered his head. A long moment passed before Caleb finally spoke. Aunt Claire didn't hurt me. The words were so soft they nearly disappeared into the room. But once they were spoken, they could not be taken back. Caleb explained that Melissa had told him to say Claire was the reason his arm was red. He did not understand why. Melissa had only said that if he did what she asked, things in the family would become peaceful again. She had also promised to buy him a new game console. Caleb had believed it was some kind of secret between adults, until he saw Claire standing in the kitchen that afternoon. He knew what he was saying was not true, but he was afraid of disappointing his mother. What caught Rachel's attention even more was another detail. Caleb remembered Daniel saying, within earshot, that things would be less stressful once Claire was no longer in the house. Caleb did not understand divorce. He did not understand property. He did not understand why the adults needed Claire to leave. He only remembered the words, and sometimes the truth did not arrive in the form of one dramatic confession. Sometimes it appeared in small pieces that did not know how to lie. Rachel called Claire after the interview ended. Claire stood up the moment her phone rang. Is Caleb okay? That was the first thing she asked. Rachel told her that Caleb was being appropriately supported and that the process still had to continue through the proper channels. Then she confirmed the most important part. Caleb's account was consistent with several key details in the camera footage. Claire closed her eyes. For days she had imagined that being cleared would feel like victory. It did not. It only made her sad. A child had been forced to carry a lie that was never his because the adults around him were trying to control the collapse of a marriage. Claire sat down. She did not hate Caleb. Not even a little. In this story, he was not the person who betrayed her. He was one of the people who had been betrayed. That afternoon, Elaine called. Her voice no longer carried the same certainty it once had. "Claire, I need to ask you something." Claire waited. "Has Daniel been moving money out of the company?" The question made Claire lift her head. "Why are you asking me that?" Elaine hesitated. "A few months ago, Daniel brought me some paperwork. He said it was just part of a business restructuring. He wanted me to sign as a witness on part of it." "Did you sign?" "No, I didn't understand what it was, so I refused." For the first time, Claire heard genuine uncertainty in Elaine's voice. Elaine had spent days defending her son because she believed family meant standing beside each other during a crisis. Now she was beginning to wonder whether that loyalty had been used as a curtain. Elaine asked quietly, "Is what you've been saying about Daniel true?" Claire looked out the window. A week earlier, she might have tried to convince her. "Not anymore. You should ask Daniel." Claire paused. "And this time you should make him answer honestly." Elaine said nothing. Claire felt no satisfaction. Some people only begin to see the truth when it touches something they personally believed in. Claire could not force them to see it sooner. The next morning, Olivia called. The financial specialist had completed an initial review based on the records Claire had legally provided. Northline had not received just a few isolated payments. The transactions appeared consistently across several months. Some of them carried descriptions too vague to clearly identify what services had actually been provided. Claire asked, "Does that mean Daniel was hiding assets?" "Not yet," Olivia answered immediately. "We need more documentation and the proper financial disclosure process, but there is enough here to justify questions." Claire felt strangely relieved that Olivia refused to turn suspicion into fact. That was exactly the difference between how Claire was choosing to act and how Daniel had treated her. Claire did not need a story that favored her. She needed a story that was true. Over the next several days, she began sleeping a little longer. Not because everything was fixed, but because she no longer spent every night trying to figure out how to make Daniel believe her. She also stopped checking whether Melissa had called. Claire was beginning to understand a lesson she had never needed before. Forgiveness and access were not the same thing. One day, she might no longer be angry with Elaine. Maybe she would even stop being angry with Melissa. But that did not mean either of them would be allowed to walk back into her life as though nothing had happened. A boundary was not a punishment. It was a door. And the person standing inside had the right to decide when it should open. That evening, Claire turned on the moon-shaped nightlight in Mia's room for the first time since her daughter had left. A soft glow spread across the empty bed. Claire sat on the edge of it. She did not know how the divorce would end. She did not know what would happen to the company. She did not know how long it would be before Mia came home. But she knew one thing. She would not disappear just to make other people more comfortable. Her phone vibrated in her hand. A message from an unknown number. Claire almost ignored it. Then she saw the first line. "My name is Tessa Reed." Claire went still. A second message appeared almost immediately. "I think we need to talk about Daniel." Claire stared at the screen as her heartbeat quickened. Then the final message appeared. "He lied to both of us." Claire sat motionless in the dim light. For days, she had thought Tessa was part of the secret Daniel was protecting. But maybe she had misunderstood the woman's role entirely. Maybe Tessa was not simply something Daniel had hidden from Claire. Maybe she was another person Daniel had hidden the truth from. And if that was true, the door Claire had just opened might lead directly to the final part of the plan Daniel still believed no one else could see. Claire read the message 3 times before replying. "My name is Tessa Reed. I think we need to talk about Daniel. He lied to both of us." A week earlier, those words might have made Claire furious. She might have called immediately, demanded answers, or poured all of her hurt onto the woman whose name had appeared on her husband's hotel reservation. But Claire was no longer reacting like the woman she had been a week ago. She took screenshots of the messages and called Olivia. The next morning, Tessa agreed to meet in a small conference room at Olivia's office. Claire did not want to meet in a coffee shop or somewhere private. Not because she was afraid. Because she no longer wanted important conversations to exist only in memory. When Tessa entered the room, Claire was surprised by what she saw. There was none of the cold confidence Claire had imagined. Tessa looked exhausted. Both of her hands were gripping the strap of her bag. For several seconds, the two women simply looked at each other. One was the wife. The other was the woman Daniel had taken on business trips that had never really been business trips. But the only person missing from the room was the one who had created the reason they were sitting across from each other. Tessa spoke first. "I know you have no reason to believe me," Claire answered calmly. "Then tell me what you can prove." Tessa hesitated. That was clearly not the response she had prepared for. She unlocked her phone and placed it on the table. "Daniel told me your marriage had been over for months." Claire gave no reaction. Tessa continued. "He said the two of you just hadn't made it public because of Mia. He told me you had already agreed to leave the company once the separation was finalized." Claire felt a heaviness settle into her chest. Daniel had never told her anything remotely like that. Tessa explained that Daniel had described Northline as part of a new business structure. He had made her believe that once Claire stepped away from the company, he would move certain projects into the new operation and Tessa would manage them. Olivia asked, "Do you have documentation of those conversations?" Tessa nodded. "Texts, emails, a few meeting schedules." She had kept them because she began to question Daniel after the accusation against Claire became known. Tessa looked at Claire. "He told me you were unstable, that something had happened involving a child in the family, and that was why you needed to leave the house." Claire felt anger rise inside her, but she refused to let it control her. Daniel had used the accusation he knew was false to create another version of Claire in Tessa's mind. A difficult wife. An unreliable mother. A business partner who was about to disappear. Tessa opened a series of messages. In one, Daniel had written that everything would become easier once Claire was out of the house. In another, he referred to the temporary situation involving the child as something that would help move the process along faster. There was no single message that described the entire plan. But when those messages were placed beside the camera footage, the bank meeting, and the Northline transactions, the picture became much clearer. Daniel had not built his plan around one enormous lie. He had built it from dozens of smaller ones. Each person had been given only one piece. Melissa had been told Claire needed to leave. Tessa had been told the marriage was already over. Elaine had been told the family was in crisis. And Claire had been told she was imagining too much. That was how Daniel kept control. No one except him could see the whole board. Until now. Tessa lowered her eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." Claire looked at her. "Good, because I'm not ready to." There was no shouting. No confrontation between two women fighting over a man. Daniel had expected them to see each other as enemies. But Claire understood that the thing worth protecting was no longer the marriage. It was the truth. Tessa agreed to provide her own records through the appropriate legal process. When the meeting ended, she stopped at the door. "Claire, I really didn't know," Claire answered. "I believe you didn't know everything." It was not forgiveness. It was simply a fair boundary between what Claire knew and what she could not yet conclude. That afternoon, Melissa began calling. The first call left no message. The second included an angry voicemail accusing Claire of destroying the family. The third was different. Melissa's voice trembled. "Daniel said this wouldn't go this far." Claire stopped listening there. She forwarded the message to Olivia. No reply. The next day, another voicemail arrived. "I only did what Daniel told me to do." Claire sat still for a long time after hearing it. Part of her had once wanted this moment. She had wanted Melissa to admit it. Wanted Daniel exposed. But now Claire only felt tired. Too many people had chosen silence or obedience because it was easier than asking whether someone else was being hurt. Rachel called late that afternoon. The evaluation involving Claire had reached a conclusion. Based on the information available, there was no support for the claim that Claire had caused the mark on Caleb's arm. Claire could not speak for several seconds. She had been waiting for those words since the day Melissa walked into her kitchen. But victory did not arrive with music or satisfaction. It arrived like a breath Claire had finally been allowed to release. The first thing she asked about was Mia. That evening, Claire was able to see her daughter. When Mia ran toward her, every bank account, every email, every lie disappeared for one moment. Claire held her tightly. Mia asked softly, "Are you coming home, Mom?" Claire looked at her daughter. The old house was still standing. But Claire now understood that home was more than an address. Home had to be a place where no one was forced to disappear just to make everyone else more comfortable. "I'll always be wherever you feel safe," Claire said. "But maybe from now on, home is going to mean something different." Mia rested her head against her mother's shoulder. That night, after her daughter fell asleep, Claire stood beside the window. Daniel still did not know that Tessa had spoken to her. He did not know that Melissa was beginning to panic. More importantly, he did not know that the people he had carefully kept separate were now beginning to share pieces of the truth with one another. Daniel had built his power by making sure everyone saw only part of the story. But that plan had one weakness. Once the pieces were placed side by side, the only person still capable of hiding the whole truth was the man who had created it. And Claire knew the day Daniel would be forced to face the complete picture was getting very close. But it did not arrive through a furious confrontation in the kitchen. It arrived through numbered case files, verified recordings, and a room where Daniel no longer had the power to decide who heard which version of the truth. Several weeks had passed since Tessa first contacted Claire. During that time, Olivia had done everything she could to keep Claire from acting on emotion. Every document was reviewed. Every questionable transaction was placed in context. The camera footage was preserved in its original form. The messages Tessa provided were handled through the proper process. Claire had once imagined justice as something explosive. In reality, it was slower, colder, more precise. The first hearing took place on a cloudy morning in Columbus. Daniel sat across from Claire. He wore the dark blue suit she had chosen for him years earlier. He still looked like the successful businessman clients trusted without hesitation. But Claire no longer saw that man. She saw what stood behind the polished appearance. The bank meeting, Northline, Tessa, Melissa, and a child who had been pulled into a plan he was too young to understand. When the pet camera footage was presented, the appropriate professional confirmed that the recording had been preserved and reviewed through the proper process. Daniel did not deny appearing in the video. Instead, he tried to change what his presence meant. He said he had only wanted Claire to leave the house for a few days so they could both have time to think. He said the family had been under tension for a long time. He said the situation had been interpreted as something more serious than he had intended. Olivia asked only one question. If all you wanted was space in your marriage, why did that need to happen alongside an accusation involving Caleb? Daniel said nothing. Claire looked at him. It was the same silence she had once endured in the kitchen. Only this time it no longer made her doubt herself. Melissa also had to answer separate questions about her original account and what Caleb had later said. Claire did not attend every step of that process. She did not want to know every detail. Caleb needed protection from the conflict between adults far more than anyone needed a public moment of revenge. Claire cared about one thing. Her name was no longer attached to the story Melissa had created. But while one part of the truth was becoming clearer, the financial side was only beginning to open. The divorce process required both sides to provide the necessary financial information. Claire's financial specialist compared the transfers, company records, and transactions connected to Northline. The picture was not as simple as Claire had once feared. Daniel could not simply press a button and make everything disappear. But certain funds had been moved in ways that required explanation. Northline had received money from the company Claire and Daniel owned together. Some payments had legitimate business explanations. Others became disputed. Most importantly, Daniel was no longer the only person deciding how much Claire was allowed to know. The relevant assets now had to be reviewed as part of the divorce process. Claire did not demand everything. She demanded visibility. For Daniel, that was the real threat. For years, much of his power had come from controlling information. Once that information no longer belonged only to him, that power began to disappear. Tessa left the company not long afterward. Melissa stopped calling Claire. Elaine also stopped asking Claire to keep the peace. She was beginning to understand that sometimes false peace was only the silence of the person being asked to endure everything. The hardest issue was still Mia. Claire did not want her daughter to become a prize in a divorce. She made that clear to Olivia. Her goal was not to erase Daniel from Mia's life. She only wanted decisions about their daughter to be based on safety, stability, and verified information. After the appropriate evaluation process, Claire became the parent with Mia's primary residence for the next stage. Daniel's time with their daughter would continue under the conditions established through that process. Claire did not celebrate when she heard the outcome. She simply closed her eyes. Mia was coming home to her. That was all she needed to hear. A few months earlier, Claire had believed real power meant the house, the company, or money in an account. Now she understood it differently. Power was being able to say no when someone tried to write your story for you. It was leaving a marriage without leaving yourself behind. After one late afternoon session, Claire walked out of the room before Daniel. He called her name in the hallway. Claire stopped. Daniel looked older than he had only a few months earlier. The cold confidence of the man who had stood in the kitchen with a recording phone was gone. He said quietly, "I never thought it would go this far." Claire looked at him for a long moment. Once she had carried 100 questions inside her. Did you love Tessa? Did you ever really love me? Why did you involve Melissa? Why did Caleb have to become part of this? But those questions no longer had power over her. Claire said only, "That was your problem, Daniel." She paused. "You thought about the plan. You never thought about the people who would have to live with the consequences." Daniel lowered his eyes. Claire turned away. There was no shouting, no curse, no loud victory. Only the sound of a woman walking away after finally deciding she no longer needed the person who betrayed her to explain why she deserved better. Outside the building, cold air brushed across Claire's face. Mia was waiting in a car with one of Claire's closest friends. The moment she saw her mother, she smiled. Claire quickened her steps. Behind her were months of lies, financial secrets, betrayal, and a marriage that had lost respect long before Claire had been willing to admit it. What lay ahead was still uncertain. She did not yet know where she would live. She did not know what would happen to the company. She did not know how long it would take before seeing Daniel's name on her phone stopped making something inside her tighten. But for the first time, uncertainty did not frighten her. It meant the future had not already been written by someone else. Daniel had tried to build a plan that would remove Claire from his life on terms that benefited him. The plan failed for one very simple reason. Claire did not disappear. She stayed long enough for the truth to be seen. And now her final challenge was no longer proving what Daniel had done. It was deciding who Claire Morgan would become now that her life finally belonged to her again. The answer did not come right away. It came nearly a year later on a bright morning in Asheville, when Claire stood inside a small room with nothing more than an old wooden desk, 2 guest chairs, and a sign carrying the name of her own design studio. No Morgan on the sign. No Daniel beside it. Just Claire. The divorce had been finalized after months of negotiation. Claire's ownership stake in the company had been resolved through an agreement both sides accepted. The relevant assets had been reviewed through the proper legal process instead of through the version Daniel once wanted her to believe. Claire did not take everything. She did not lose everything either. More importantly, she no longer needed permission to understand what belonged to her own life. Once Mia's living arrangements were properly settled, mother and daughter moved to Asheville. On the day they left Columbus, Claire drove slowly past the old house one final time. She had always imagined she would cry. But when she looked at the windows, all she felt was a strange kind of quiet. That house had once represented success. Then it became the place Claire was told to leave in the name of keeping the peace. Now it was only a building. Her real home was sitting beside her, wearing headphones and singing the wrong lyrics to a song on the radio. Mia pulled one side of the headphones away. "Are you sad, Mom?" Claire thought for a moment. "A little." "Then why are you smiling?" Claire looked at her daughter. "Because sadness and freedom can exist at the same time." Mia did not completely understand, but she smiled anyway. Their new life did not look like a perfect ending. Claire's studio began with only 2 clients. The printer jammed constantly. She paid her own bills, called suppliers herself, and spent more than one night awake wondering whether there would be enough work the following month. But every morning when she opened the office door, Claire knew exactly what was happening inside her own business. No hidden accounts. No meetings she was excluded from. No one telling her the numbers were too complicated for her to understand. Daniel had once believed Claire lacked business instincts because she had no desire to control other people. He had mistaken kindness for weakness. Now the very thing he underestimated had become one of her greatest strengths. Clients trusted Claire. The first employee she hired had access to the information needed to do the job properly. Every agreement was clear. Claire did not build a new company to prove Daniel wrong. She built it the way she had once hoped her marriage would exist, with transparency, respect, and boundaries that did not require anyone to disappear. Elaine sent a letter in early spring. Not a short text message. A handwritten letter. She apologized for standing beside Daniel before she was willing to listen to Claire. She admitted that she had called silence peace because facing the truth about her son had been too painful. Claire read the letter twice. She did not call immediately. Forgiveness was not a switch. And a second chance did not mean everything had to return to the way it had been. Over time, Claire allowed Elaine to speak with Mia more regularly. Their contact grew slowly, clearly, and within boundaries Claire felt were appropriate. Elaine accepted that. For the first time, she understood that loving someone did not give them permission to cross another person's boundaries. Melissa no longer contacted Claire. Claire made no effort to find out what her life looked like now. Only Caleb occasionally entered her thoughts. Claire hoped that one day he would understand that what happened had never been his responsibility. Throughout the entire story, Caleb had never been the villain. He was simply a child caught between the poor choices of adults. Tessa also disappeared from Claire's life after the necessary documents had been provided. There was no unexpected friendship, no emotional reconciliation. Just two women who had once been told two different versions of the same life by the same man. Sometimes growth did not mean turning everyone into friends. Sometimes it simply meant no longer turning them into enemies once the truth was clear. One late summer evening, Claire was sitting outside when her phone lit up. Daniel. She stared at his name for a long time. The message contained only one sentence. I wish I could go back to before that Sunday. Claire read it. Once she would have asked why. Did he regret losing his family? Did he regret Tessa leaving? Did he regret the plan failing? Or did he only regret that the consequences had become larger than he expected? Claire no longer needed the answer. Daniel was still looking backward, searching for a moment where he might have changed the outcome. Claire had learned to look forward. She deleted the message. Not to punish him. Not out of hatred. But because some doors, once closed, did not need to be reopened just to check whether the person standing on the other side had changed. Mia stepped onto the porch and sat beside her mother. In the distance, the mountain slowly disappeared into the evening light. Claire thought about the woman who had once stood in a kitchen in Columbus while an entire family looked at her as though she had to prove she deserved to be believed. That woman had thought losing her marriage was the worst thing that could happen. She had been wrong. Losing herself just to keep a marriage alive would have been worse. And the most beautiful thing was not finding someone else to love her. It was finding the woman inside herself who had been neglected for far too long. Claire had not become strong because Daniel betrayed her. That strength had always been there. The betrayal had simply forced her to see it. She once believed respect in marriage was something couples earned by working hard enough. Now she understood it had to be the foundation. When the foundation disappeared, staying was not always loyalty. Sometimes leaving was the only way a person could protect the best parts of who they still were. Claire looked at Mia, then toward the city lights appearing below. The new life still came with bills. There were still exhausting days. There were still memories that hurt. But there was no longer fear every time a door opened. No more wondering what the person she loved might be hiding. No one else was writing Claire's story for her. And that was the real victory. Not that Daniel lost, not that Claire won, but that she was finally no longer living a life where her value depended on how someone else chose to treat her. If Claire's story reminds you of a moment when you had to choose between holding on to a relationship and holding on to your self-respect, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe that a painful ending can sometimes become the beginning of a better life, like this video and subscribe for more stories about betrayal, hidden truths, marriage lessons, personal growth, and people who rediscover their strength after believing they had lost everything. Because sometimes the most important second chance is not the one we give to the person who hurt us. It is the one we give ourselves.